Is Matthew Levi? I already have a video talking about this topic, where I went over the 12 apostles showing that there's no contradiction over the lists we see in the Gospels. However, I had one interesting comment. The person made the point that they did not believe that Matthew and Levi were the same person. Rather, they argued that the Gospels were simply contradicting themselves over who this person actually was. This is my longer, in-depth video on why we can be rather certain that Matthew and Levi were the same person. The Bible indeed never explicitly notes that Matthew and Levi are the same person. However, we have many hints inside the Gospels and outside the Gospels that make this point. Firstly, we should look at what the Bible says about Levi and Matthew. The name Levi or Levis is only used 3 times in the Bible, in Mark 2:14, Luke 5:27, and Luke 5:29. In Mark we read, "As he passed by, he saw Levi the son of Apolatius, sitting in the tax booth. And he said to him, 'Follow me.' And he got up and followed him. And it happened that he was reclining at the table at his house, and many tax collectors and sinners were dining with Jesus and his disciples. For there were many of them, and they were following him." The passage gives us 4 details of Levi. His father is named Apolatius. He became a disciple of Jesus. He is a tax collector, and he owns his own home. The Gospel of Luke provides similar information. After that, he went out and noticed a tax collector named Levi sitting in the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he left everything behind and got up and began to follow him. And Levi gave a big reception for him in the house. And there was a great crowd of tax collectors and other people reclining at the table with them. Again, we see Levi as a tax collector, became a disciple of Jesus after he said, "Follow me," and he owns his own home. The name Matthew or Matthias is only mentioned 5 times, in Matthew 9:9, Matthew 10:3, Mark 3:18, Luke 6:15, and Acts 1:13. Matthew 9:9 provides similar information of what is seen in Mark 2 and Luke 5. As Jesus went out from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting in the tax collector's booth, and he said to him, "Follow me," and he got up and followed them. Then it happened that as Jesus was reclining at the table in his house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were dining with Jesus and his disciples. Matthew is a tax collector, and he became a disciple of Jesus after Jesus said, "Follow me." The passage does not seem to say the house was Matthew's, but they still go to a house after this happens. Just like in Mark and Luke, there are also other tax collectors and Pharisees and sinners in the house. The other references are rather vague. Matthew 10:3 reaffirms that he was a tax collector and a disciple of Jesus. Mark 3:18, Luke 6:15, and Acts 1:13 note Matthew as a disciple of Jesus, specifically an apostle. It's important to note that in every reference to Matthew or Levi, the same information is said. There's no apparent contradiction between their details that would assume them to be different people. Now we also have to realize it was very common for people to have more than one name. Paul was of course also called Saul. Mark was also called John. Sarah was also called Sarai. Abraham was also called Abraham. Jacob was also called Israel. And Peter was also called Cephas and Simon. Thus, to assume that Levi is just simply another name for Matthew would not be a strange assumption, as this was a very common practice. Normally, a person has more than one name due to either change in meaning, such as with Abram to Abraham, or due to a name's being changed due to different languages. For example, Cephas is Aramaic, Peter is Greek, and Simon is Hebrew. Paul or Paulus is Latin, while Saul is Hebrew. When it comes to the name Matthew, it likely comes from the Aramaic Matthai, while the name Levi likely comes from the Hebrew. As mentioned before, it was very common for people to have different names depending on what language they were speaking, so it's very possible this is why Matthew has more than one name here. And in fact, we even do this today. The name Henry is Enrique in French. The name John becomes Jan in French, while in German it becomes Johannes. These are all the same name, just different based on the language being spoken. Another way to find out if Levi and Matthew are the same person is by looking at what the early church said on the topic. Origen, who was born in the 2nd century, had made a rather contradictory statement on this topic. As Brett Nogbury, professor of history of religions, commentates, it may well be that Levi, who followed Jesus, was a tax collector, but he was by no means among the number of apostles. So here Origen appears to argue that Levi the tax collector was not an apostle, nor did the gospel direct this custom. For even Matthew says about himself, when Jesus was passing by and encountered a certain man sitting in a tax booth named Matthew. But Luke says about the same person that when Jesus was passing by, he saw a certain tax collector named Levi and said to him, "Follow me." So here we have Origen making it quite explicit that Matthew and Levi are the same person. It's puzzling. Origen seems to not have a firm view on the matter, but just his view on the circumstances of whatever argument he is making. We see that Origen in one instance asserts Levi is not an apostle, but also asserts in another instance that Matthew and Levi are the same person. This, as Brett notes, is quite puzzling. Due to this blunder, it's hard to take Origen's reliable source on this topic. Other fathers do not present such contradictory accounts. Jerome, the author of the Latin Vulgate, wrote, Matthew is also called Levi, and he from publican came to be an apostle. First of all, composed the gospel of Christ in Judea. Augustine also wrote, were it not that Mark and Luke, who repeat the account in terms thoroughly similar, had made it plain that it was the house of Levi, that is to say, Matthew. Proponents of the belief that Levi and Matthew are the same person tend to also use Heraclitian's list, where it says, confession with the mouth taketh place also before the authorities in this multitude incorrectly consider it to be the only confession, for even the hypocrites make this confession. But it will be found that these words are not spoken universally, for not all who are saved made the confession by mouth, among whom are Matthew, Philip, Thomas, Levi, and many others. The quote, of course, notes Matthew and Levi seem to show they are different, distinct people. There are, however, some major problems with this quote. Firstly, this is not from an original writing of Heraclitian. Rather, this is just a quote in a fragment only found in the writing of Clement of Alexandria. We don't have any reason to accept this quote as reliable in any sense, as even the early church knew Heraclitian as a Gnostic. Even if we did believe this quote was in any way reliable, we don't even know which Matthew or Levi is being mentioned here. It's not as if there was only one Matthew and one Levi in existence, so we have no reason to be certain who's being spoken of here. As Dr. Shelton in his book Quest for the Historical Apostles writes, two challenges face distinction between Matthew and Levi. First, the source for Clement is Gnostic Heraclitian, and his full endorsement of the details might not be intended as much of an overarching quality of their common purpose. Second, the reference to many others invites the possibility that beginning with Levi, Clement is moving away from the original 12 to name others with a common purpose profiled here. There is insufficient evidence from Clement to conclude that Matthew and Levi of the Gospels are different people. It is evident based on the data that Levi and Matthew are the same person. The Bible describes Matthew or Levi as having the same exact qualities. It's also known that during this time, it was common to have more than one name. And finally, the Church Fathers too make this rather clear.